Hi, I'm Paul from Trending Who, What, Where, and When. Today I'll be speaking with the author Angela Wren about her book, the fourth in a series, Marseille. Well, like we had talked about in our email, as we're a travel site, I thought you might want to go over some of those beautiful spots that you shared with me in your email. They're incredible places to go to.
They're, apart from one, they're all in Yorkshire, which is where I live. It's a very large county in the north of England. But if I want to go somewhere really nice, take some friends out for a meal, I would go to the Wentbridge House Hotel, which is a tiny little village, but the hotel has lovely grounds. If I want to go shopping, I love to go to York or Harrogate, and both those towns have, actually they're cities to us, but probably to you, across the pond, they're just towns. They're too small to be cities as far as you're concerned, maybe. But each of them has a beautiful theatre. There's the Theatre Royal in York and the White Rose Theatre in Harrogate. And sometimes I will pick up an afternoon play. And of course, if I'm shopping in either of those two places, I have to visit Betty's tea shop. It's kind of oldie-worldy, and they do fabulous cakes and coffee and tea. They do afternoon tea as well. So it all depends on what I'm doing as to whether I go in to Betty's in the morning, going for lunch, or going for afternoon tea. If I want to go to the coast, the Yorkshire Coast, which is on the eastern side of England, is absolutely fabulous. And there are some fabulous little fishing villages that were fishing villages and not so much now, such as Staithes, Port Mulgrave, Runswick Bay, Sands End, and then there are the larger ports such as Robin Hood's Bay and Whitby. And there's also a coastal trail, so you can walk from one of the little villages to the other, depending upon how far you want to go. And there's some fabulous scenery around there. As well as that, we have the Yorkshire Moors, the North Yorkshire Moors, which are very rugged, but there are some fabulous little villages there, old farming villages, such as Revo. There's an old abbey at Revo. There's Helmsley, Leyburn, which is a fairly substantial market town for the Moors, so it will still be small by your standards. Then we've got Boltby and Leverton and Goathland, which is kind of really high up on the moors. So it's a lovely little village, but it's a bit isolated and it can be a bit bleak. But on a cold winter's day, you know, especially if there's some snow on the ground, the scenery up there can be absolutely breathtaking. And then you've got the Yorkshire Dales, which is on the western side of the county. And there's some lovely little places there: Settle, Grassington, Aysgarth, Hawes, any number of them. And there are lots of little villages in between that are worth stopping and just having a little walk around and just admiring the scenery. And I'm a very bookish person. So if I want to do something bookish, then I will go to a library somewhere, or I will go to maybe Whitby and browse around the second-hand bookshops. But one other place that is really good to go, which isn't in Yorkshire, but is only just the other side of the county boundary, is the John Rylands Library in Manchester. It's an absolutely stunning building, and the collection that it holds is utterly amazing, from a first edition of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales up to James Joyce's Ulysses, another first edition, so, and lots of other things in between. And if I wanted to really, really treat myself with a special theatre visit, then I would go right up into North Yorkshire to Richmond. They have a Georgian theatre there, a working Georgian theatre, so it's a great historic significance for the whole of the country. And I've seen some fabulous plays there. But it's also a wonderful little market town, and they have a farmer's market in the centre of the town quite regularly. I can't remember, it's usually on a Saturday, but I can't remember how often it is, whether it's once a month or once a fortnight or whatever, but certainly well worth a visit.
Sounds like a beautiful area.
It is. That's why I spend all my time traveling in France, but when I'm at home, I stay at home.
Okay. Well, I was reading your outline and talking about the years that you spent going different places and how you started with this series. Maybe you'd like to tell us about that.
Okay, I hadn't thought about writing a book until I packed in my job as a project manager. I resigned. I kind of reached a point where I just had enough, and so I started spending much more time in France after that. And I was in the Cévennes, which is a mountainous area, south central France, and mountainous to me is 1,000 meters above sea level. So it's quite high, and in comparison with here in England, about the best mountain peaks that we've got that come close are Snowdon or Ben Nevis, which are of course our two highest peaks in the whole of the country. So being that far above sea level is interesting to me.
Yeah.
But it's a fabulous rugged area of the country. The villages are very sparse, and because it's mountainous, because the weather can change in a moment. And I was there in September 2007, and I'd arrived on a beautiful autumn afternoon. The deciduous trees were all brown and golden and red against the inky pines. And the next morning, I woke up and there was snow everywhere. It was snowing. And as I'm watching it snow, for some peculiar reason, my thoughts immediately turned to murder, because it occurred to me that if you lived in that area and you had a particular grudge, and you knew because of the weather forecast that it was going to snow the next morning, you could use that change in the weather to cover your misdeeds. And so that very first idea about setting a murder mystery in that area, it just came to me. I didn't do anything with it for 2 years though.
I read here, then 2 years later you were somewhere else and started working on it.
Yeah, I was in the Charente, which is a lowland area way over to the west of the country, and it sits along the Bay of Biscay. And I was actually there because there was a car event, classic cars and old cars, in Angoulême, which was close by to where I was camped. And I wanted to see that. It was quite a spectacle. But whilst I was sat in the campsite one afternoon, it suddenly occurred to me that I could use something that had happened a couple of days earlier and create a murder mystery from it. What had happened was I'd seen some English people in the supermarket, and they invited me for tea and coffee and cakes and so on, and had a lovely afternoon chatting to them. But when I thought about it afterwards, it suddenly occurred to me that, you know, there I was talking to these people in the supermarket, didn't know them from Adam, yet went to their house for a cake, and anything could have happened. Luckily, they were really nice people, and so I was quite safe. But it occurred to me afterwards that that may not have been the situation, and that set me thinking. And of course, I went back to the Cévennes, and I thought, yes, if some really evil people were around who did prey on travellers, then that would be the place to do it. So the story was kind of born then, and I started writing it. Not immediately, but not long after that, about 18 months later.
Okay. So that would be your first story?
Yes.
Okay.
Massandriere, yes.
Okay, I'll need to go back and read that now.
In comparison with Marseille, it's a very gentle story.
Oh.
And because even before Massandriere was published, I knew that there were going to be 4 stories. Because as I sat down working things out, I realised that I actually had the potential for 4 separate stories. And so even before Messandria was published, I knew that there was going to be Marseille and the dreadful crime that happened in Marseille.
And the second and third book also, Merle and Montbel?
Yeah.
Are they similar to the first book or more similar to the fourth book?
As the books progress, they get more and more intense. And so the thing with Messandria, that it's very village-based and very much based in the Haute-Cévennes, whereas Merle, my central character, Jacques Foray, who investigates all the crimes, he's moved out of the village of Messandria and now lives in the city of Mende, which is about 30 kilometres down the mountain. But it's still 500 metres above sea level, so it's still quite high. And the crime that he's dealing with in the second book is cybercrime and commercial espionage and stuff. So in that respect, it's very, very different, because Messandria is very much about the countryside and the Cévennes itself.
And then your third book is when Jacques moves to Paris?
No. He's from Paris originally.
Oh, okay.
He worked in the Sûreté, but because of an incident whilst he was on duty, he took a bullet in the shoulder, and he decided that enough was enough, and that perhaps he needed to take stock of his life and decide what he really needed to do next, which was how he ends up in the Cévennes at the beginning of Messandria. But Montbel is again back to the Haute-Cévennes, because Montbel is a little village that is about 8 or 10 kilometres from my original village, Messandria. And in that book, Jack is investigating an old police case, and he's been asked to have a look at it, and he doesn't find what he expects to find. Let's put it that way.
Well, when I was reading your Marseille book, within about 3 or 4 pages, I could tell that I wasn't going to be able to put it down until I finished it. So I pretty much read it right away, because it was fast moving and interesting.
Yeah. Out of the 4, that is the most intense.
Well, tell us a little bit more about your Marseille book, if you'd like.
Okay, well, the action begins in Mende, in Jack's office in the city of Mende, and he discovers that a youngster has been kidnapped from the village, and obviously the mother is very distraught. And he follows the trail to try and find out what has happened to the little boy, and that takes him to Marseille. And he also discovers, whilst he's in Marseille, that an old adversary of his is hanging around and is somehow connected to his search for the kidnapped child. But Jack always gets his man. He always gets whoever the perpetrators are, of course. And so, yes, he does find out what has happened. But he also comes across a few other things along the way that he really wasn't expecting to find too. There's quite a lot going on in that book.
There is. And then will you continue that series?
Yes, I've actually started writing the 5th book. After having written Marseille, I needed to take a break, and I also had another project that I had to move on to. So I've got that more or less finished and sorted, and so now I've just recently started working on book 5. I've got my planning done, I know what the crime is, and it's just a question of getting my first draft completed before I leave for France at the end of August.
Are you going back there for research for the book?
No. No, I'm actually going back because it's the first time I've been able to travel this year.
Oh, okay.
So I'm obviously going to go to my favourite place in the whole world, which is France.
When you go there, how do you go? Do you take the train to go there?
No. Go by car and ferry. I like to travel around. Having the car means that I can just move on when I want to. So if I find a place and it's especially interesting, I can stay longer. or if I get to an interesting place and it's chucking it down with rain, I can just move and come back later.
Okay.
I have thought numerous times about whether I should get a place over there, but the reality is that if you have a particular cottage or somewhere in a village, then you kind of feel obliged to go there
Sure.
to make the best use of it, which means that you won't see the rest of the country, whereas being completely mobile means that I can just travel around and take as long as I want, wherever I want.
Okay, that sounds really nice.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, when the sun shines, it's fabulous, and there's all that wine and cheese, and not to mention the fabulous restaurants and the food, beautiful French food.
Yeah, it'd be a nice area to be in, especially if you had the time and you could go from here to there with your car, and you're familiar with it. You must speak the language by now, so.
I would never claim to be fluent, but I can get by in most situations. But, you know, the kind of thing where my knowledge of the language lets me down is if, you know, if anyone wants to talk to me about French politics, well, one, I don't follow it. Two, politics has a specific language of its own. It uses a specific vocabulary, which I've never ever bothered to learn.
Okay.
So, you know, it'd be a difficult conversation, to say the least.
So your fifth book, you think it'll be like another year before it comes out?
My publisher, when they found out I started writing it, was very keen to get dates out of me for pre-publication. And I kind of said, no, let me get to the end of the first draft and then we'll talk about dates.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So I'm hoping to get to the end of the first draft before the end of August. Then I'm going to put it in a drawer and shoot off to France for a short while, and by then I'll be able to think about it, and by the time I get back I will be able to take it on to the next level, and then I can talk about pre-publication dates, etc. But I can see what they're angling for. They're looking for a date. They're looking for a date, you know, towards Christmas, so that they can catch the Christmas market. Oh, wow. And then maybe publish early next year.
So I guess I was also going to ask you if you had any advice for new writers. You have a lot of experience at this point, and it seems like these writers are always sending us questions, but we aren't able to answer the complications involved in getting started and getting published. And
I think there are far more experienced writers out there than me who can provide, you know, really useful and pertinent advice. All I would say, I think, is don't give up. If you're not a member of a writers group locally where you live, then do that. I found it invaluable, especially, you know, once I knew I could trust the people who were in the group. They gave me fantastic advice and fantastic criticism on the stuff that I took to them to read. So I found it a very useful experience. The other thing I would say is when you think you're ready to publish, make sure your manuscript is in absolutely tip-top condition. Even if that means you have to spend a little bit of cash to get a professional editor to look at it, it will stand you in good stead, because when you start submitting to publishers, they're looking to lessen the pile, not to take on everything. They're looking to shortlist whatever the pile is they've got on their desks, and they're going to shortlist what they consider to be the absolute best. So you owe it to yourself to make sure that your manuscript is in absolutely tip-top condition. And I suppose the final thing I would say is do your research. There are a lot of publishers out there, and there's a lot of information on the internet where you can get information about publishers. So make sure you submit to a publisher who is likely to take your book. And personally, I decided that because I was a new crime writer, and because crime is such a vast genre, and because there are loads and loads of publishers who publish crime, that I would research independent and small publishers. And I found Crooked Cat by doing that. They were at the top of my list. And it was Crooked Cat who took my books right from the outset. So spending, I don't know, I've probably spent about 2 months, maybe 2.5 months researching publishers. And I think that work paid off. I was lucky enough to get my book taken straight away. Not an awful lot of people have that much luck.
Yes, I think so. Is there anything I did not bring up that you'd like to talk about as far as your books?
Only, I suppose, that anybody reading them who hasn't been to the Cévennes, they really should go. It's a beautiful area of the country. I try to bring as much as I can into the books to give hints to the reader of the kind of area that they would be visiting if they do decide to go there. So lots of tiny little villages. It's a very harsh life, I would expect, or at least it would have been in the 17th, 18th and 19th century. But the city of Mende has, there's been a settlement there from very, very early. And there are some vestiges of the original sort of medieval city walls, but only just a few bits here and there. But the area has a fascinating history too. And when I can touch on that history in the books, I do try to bring it in. But of course, I have to be very careful that what takes the reader forward is the plot, principally. So I kind of sometimes find I get a bit carried away and have to take it out again when I'm talking about the scenery and the history of the area. But it's a fabulous place to visit, really is. The scenery can be spectacular. The people are very, very friendly, and you can find some very unusual local produce. For instance, there are loads and loads of chestnut trees in the area. And the chestnut tree was kind of a staple for the local people. So they would use the wood to help build their houses and build their furniture. They would use the nuts and grind them down to make flour. So there's a particular type of biscuit made partially with chestnut flour. And it has a very, it has a kind of nutty taste, a warm nutty taste. Some people I can understand wouldn't like it, but I find the flavour quite interesting, and I quite like to look out little things like that. There's also a particular type of, I suppose the best description would be to call it a kind of cheesecake that they make over there. And there are various other types of pastries that you can really only get in the Cévennes, and it's worthwhile going to a local patisserie and when you're visiting and see what they've got. The bread too, they do make bread with chestnut flour, you know, an element of chestnut flour there, which gives it a nutty flavour too. So all sorts of little different things that you can find there.
And the chestnuts grow there. I just saw an image the other day of the shell that the chestnut comes out of. It looked all spiky.
Yeah, that might be a horse chestnut.
Oh, okay.
There's different kinds of chestnuts. There's the chestnuts that you eat, which in France are called châtaignes, and then there's the horse chestnut, which generally speaking we don't eat. Over here we use the nuts that come out of horse chestnuts to play a game called Concords.
Okay. Okay.
Well, we string the nut, we put the nut on string, and then we bash the other person's nut with it, and whoever nut splits is the loser. It's a kid's game.
I've never heard of that game, but that sounds like it would be fun.
I think it's very old, very, very old, but it's something that's peculiar to us here in England.